When my dad sits in services, he does a lot of what I like to call synagogue math. If we're on page 45 now, and the Aleinu is on page 116, and we're averaging about 5 minutes per page, then how much longer do I have to sit here? If you're wondering, he'll be watching Shir Tikva services after the fact and playing it at 2 times the speed. I imagine if my dad were sitting here at the start of Yizkor, he'd be a little perplexed. If the Yizkor service starts on page 538 and ends on page 607, then that means, well, wait a minute. Isn't the service supposed to be half an hour? For those of you wondering along with my dad, yes, the Yizkor service is around half an hour. Yes, our Machzor dedicates about 70 pages to Yizkor. And no, we don't collectively read even half of those 70 pages. If you've been doing this synagogue math along with my dad, you might ask another related question. Why dedicate so many pages to one service? I did not edit this Machzor, but I do have a guess at an answer. Yizkor, as Rabbi Shoshana Boyd Gelfand puts it, is, quote, the one moment in the Jewish liturgical calendar when what matters most is not communal, but individual memory, end quote. On Passover, we're commanded to remember our collective story of liberation. On Sukkot, we remember our collective story of wandering in the desert. But during Yizkor, Rabbi Gelfand says, instead of collectively conjuring our communal past, each of us stands personally consumed by our own singular memories of relatives and friends who have died. Yizkor provides a communal space for individual reflection and inward memorializing. We stand collectively, but absorbed in our own personal memories. We sit here together, but we experience our own individual grief. Grief and loss is never the same for any two people. Some of you might be sitting here lost in a sea of grief, unsure where to find the anchor, hopeless about if you'll ever see the shore. Some of you might be caught in feelings of regret as you reflect on your loved ones who have passed, wishing that you had said or done things differently, replaying the same memory or conversation. And some of you might be feeling okay, and perhaps feeling some guilt over not feeling enough sadness in this moment. I think that the editors of this Machzor dedicated nearly 70 pages to Yizkor in the hopes that each person might find something that speaks to them personally, and find something that speaks to them personally every year. Maybe last year you were feeling okay, and this year you're feeling unanchored. Maybe last year you were stuck on one memory, and this year it feels a little easier to let go. At each Yizkor, each year, we arrive at this moment as a different person. I remember walking into my Saba and Savta's house, my grandfather and grandmother's house, after my first year of rabbinical school, and wandering absent-mindedly toward the living room bookshelf. Among the photographs, I suddenly noticed a beautiful set of Talmud, rabbinic texts, that I had never noticed before. I opened one up to discover a handwritten note to my Saba. I was suddenly awash in a new wave of grief over his death, wondering what conversations we could have had, what questions he might have asked me about my studies. My learning had led me to new grief and to a new way of remembering. For you, it might not be a bookshelf. It might be a new child, a new job, a death, or even the discovery of an old photo album. But the beauty of Yizkor is that it meets us in all of these moments, and it meets us however we are. The beauty of Yizkor is that it just asks us to show up with whatever we are feeling, to show up however we are at the end of this year. The service of Yizkor might evoke sadness, but nowhere in the nearly 70 pages of Yizkor does it say, please enter an emotional state of sadness before reciting this prayer. Yizkor, the very name of this service, is the tzivui, or the command form of the Hebrew verb zachar, to remember. We show up to this service not to feel a certain way, but to remember. Yizkor invites us to ask ourselves, what do I want and need to remember right now? How can I use Yizkor as a jumpstart out of or into the way I want to approach grief about this person or these people this year? How did my person or people inspire me? And what legacy did they leave me? And the Yizkor prayer itself, contained within the service of the same name, this prayer emphasizes the I, the individual. In the first line of the prayer, we insert the name of the person or people we're remembering. We recite the line, "May I bring honor to this person's memory by word and deed." We recognize that even if we're sitting next to someone who's remembering that same person, that we each have our own relationship with them, that we each have our own experience with them. Our individual grief doesn't just affect the way we say these prayers. It affects our actions, our behaviors, our lives. It affects how we bring honor to that person's memory by our words and by our deeds. The service of Yizkor and the prayer of Yizkor does its own reminding. Yizkor says, remember, your grief is yours. You alone get to set the terms. Your grief is yours. You alone get to set the terms. I am not the inventor of this idea, not even close. Our rabbis have been teaching us this for generations. In Mishnah Brachot, in one of our rabbinic texts, we learn that Rabban Gamliel, one of the greatest sages of all time, didn't follow traditional mourning rituals. His students questioned his choices. Are you sure? They asked. Didn't you teach us differently? And he responded simply, I am not like other people. I am unique in this particular way. In Moed Katan, a tractate of Talmud that deals with the intersection of mourning and holidays, there are pages and pages of discussion about the rules of mourning. And they don't just list the rules. Most of that text is taken up with the questions of what are the exceptions? When do we bend the rules? I'll save you some learning of those pages if you wish, and tell you that the moral of the story is that the exceptions are just as common, if not more common, than the rule. As Anita Diamant describes, every Jewish mourner follows the path of all the Jewish mourners who preceded them. When you rise to say Kaddish, when you rise to say Yizkor, you are shoulder to shoulder with everyone who stands or ever stood as you do, recalling a beloved face that is gone, but not forgotten. Your grief is yours, and yet you're here, sitting here, with us, with an us, with a we, with the people physically here, or with the people remotely here, with the people you're remembering, with all the generations that came before us. We have inherited the authority to be the experts on our own grief. So this is my invitation to you, to use this time as you need it. Not as you think you're supposed to use it, not as you think you're supposed to need it, but as you need it. To reflect on the memories that you need to reflect on right now, to feel what you need to feel right now. We have inherited the authority to be experts on our own grief. Let's use it.